Wellness by Designs, and I'm your host, Andrew Whitfield Cook. Jessica Donovan is a naturopath who specialises in children's health through her business, Natural Super Kids. And today we're discussing how to manage children's immune systems, which I get is a massive topic, but we're going to try and give you some clinical pearls today. Welcome to Wellness by Designs, Jess. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me. Excited to be chatting.
Absolute pleasure, an absolute pleasure. But I guess to start, we need to talk about foundations. Where do we start with kids' health? And I know I'm warning people, this is a huge topic, but where do you start from a practical level?
Yeah, I really love starting with the foundational pieces because I feel like we can, get almost there or even all the way there with a lot of kids. So when it comes to kids' immune systems, the first thing I'm always thinking about is their diet and nutrition. So, like I think we're all aware that kids are eating so much more processed, refined, nutrient depleted foods that doesn't have the goodness, the nutrition that they need, and also that is loaded with the nasties, the sugar and the additives, and all of those sorts of things. So that is often sort of where I start, talking to parents about their kids' diet. What's going into their bodies on a daily basis. And from there, it often becomes really clear that some of those really important immune nutrients are lacking, or the intake of them is lacking. Things like zinc and iron, vitamin A, vitamin D, of course, which is more dependent on sort of lifestyle factors, as we know. Vitamin C. So that's where I'm often sort of starting to talk to parents. And sugar. Sugar is such a huge one. We know that sugar depletes the function of neutrophils, and of course, neutrophils are part of that innate immunity that kids rely on much more heavily than we do as adults, because they haven't built up that adaptive side of their immune system. So we know that sugar sort of slows down the function of those neutrophils. So that's a big topic as well.
Now, that's a very interesting point you make because their innate immune system is really driving things. Their adaptive immune system hasn't got the memory yet. So how can we help
Exactly.
that along? Like, I guess the archetypical poster child here would be colostrum from mother's milk upon breastfeeding. That's in infancy. But what about with
Mm.
kids? How can we help their innate immune system to handle things apart from just reducing sugar simply?
Yeah, well, it's powering up the immune cells with nutrients as well, with nutrition, with vitamin C, with zinc. That's super important. And the other side of it is, making sure that they're being exposed to microbes through their environment and their lifestyle. The old hygiene hypothesis that tells us that that lack of exposure to microbes early on in life does affect a child's immune system. So we want them to be outside and getting that all important sun exposure for the vitamin D, of course, but also that just that naturally from being in an outdoor environment and playing outside, they're getting that exposure to different microbes and things, which is of course building up their gut microbiome, and also really important for immune development. So I think that's a big factor in kids' immunity as well.
Do you know, just along that line, do you think maybe one of the points here might be to get the kids out in nature rather than going to the local park where there's copper logs with, chromium, copper, arsenic, CCA, these toxicants in the local park that the council has provided us. Rather than doing that, get them out into nature, get them to the beach, get them to soil rather than dirt.
Yes, yes, that this is such a good point as well, because like you said, there's so many chemicals and other problems in those the parks and the playgrounds. So if we can have a space in our own backyard that we know is, low in chemicals, that can be really great. But yeah, going as a family to visit national parks and going camping. I mean, we're so lucky here in Australia going to,
Mm.
conservation parks and just letting kids play. Yeah, super important.
Okay, so with regards to nutrients and nutrient depletion, if you look at even the Australian Bureau of Statistics, you've got worrying is one word, disgusting is another. Um, there's a huge amount of kids who are depleted in many nutrients. And this is one of my beefs with dietitians when they just say, oh, just eat a healthy lifestyle. Well, it's obvious
Mm,
we're not because
mm.
they're rampant. So things like even iron, for instance, in kids. Let's start with that one. What do you do? How do you help parents to navigate these simple nutrients in foods?
Yeah, so I think, often it comes down to just parents being busy and not paying enough attention to, what's going into their kids' diet. What's kind of, normal these days is very different than what was normal, 10, 20 years ago. Those sometimes treat foods that used to be, maybe once or twice a week. There's now 2 packets of those in every kid's lunchbox, every single day. So it's educating parents, which is something that I'm really passionate about, making parents aware, but also inspiring them with ideas for nutrient rich recipes that don't take a whole lot of time to make is really important. And then I guess the other side of it is the fussy eating and picky eating, and iron's a really good example, and zinc's another one of nutrients that tend to be lacking in kids that are fussy and prefer those white, beige, soft foods that don't have very much nutrition. So that whole area of fussy eating needs to be addressed as well, like on a family level. But I think as practitioners, we can offer sort of support to parents when they're in that trap of their kids only eating, those white, beige foods.
And along that lines, you've got extremely powerful marketing, beguiling parents into thinking that they're healthy as well. They're high in fiber. They've got added
Yes.
nutrients. What I find quizzical is why do these why does bread need added vitamins? Like it's
Exactly.
an oxymoron. It's crazy.
Yeah,
How
so
do you
it's
navigate
again,
that?
it's like, yeah, it's educating parents, to turn the packets around and have a look at the ingredient list. Don't get sucked into those claims at the front that are there to suck us in. They're there to suck those busy mums that have got 2 kids hanging off the trolley. They just wanna get out of the supermarket as quickly as they can, so they grab those foods that say, no added sugar or, high in fiber, without turning the packet around. Yeah, so that's really huge, and again, educating parents to shop at farmers markets or, get onto an organic box co-op, or if they are going to the supermarket for their weekly shopping, to try and focus on the perimeters of the supermarket where the fresher food is, and limit the amount of food that they're buying from the aisles.
It's really interesting. Your comment about picky eaters. Like I remember our kids going through this period. One of my children had an extremely bad diet, and I remember Lee and I, my wife, and I arguing about if we don't buy the food, it's not there for him to eat. But the
Mhm.
comment was made by him to Lee um, about thank you for not over controlling my life. This son now has the most brilliant diet. He cares about what he eats. And yet we did virtually nothing. I'm not saying we sort of enabled him, but we didn't
Mm.
harangue him a lot. We let him go through his phase, and he enlightened himself indeed. So how much do you have to teach the parents, And how much do you have to teach the kids about the long-term ramifications of sugar, of high sugar diets, of poor diets, that sort of thing?
Yeah, such a good question because, all kids are motivated by different things, but the research shows that saying, come on, you need to eat this because it's healthy doesn't work for kids. So I really like the approach of the division of responsibility. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it takes the pressure off parents and it empowers kids. So as parents, we're responsible for what food we're providing to the child and when they're eating, the eating times and the eating environment where they're eating. But the child, no matter what age they are, is responsible for how much of that they eat and what parts of it they eat. So, yeah, that's the approach that I really like to take, and it does take the pressure off parents, as I said, and it empowers kids, because a lot of fussy eating comes down to control and behavior as well. And so nearly all kids will go through a fussy eating sort of stage, but how long that kind of goes on for, I've found from the families that I've talked to, is often dependent on how we respond to it as adults. And of course, we want our kids to eat the healthy, nutrient rich foods, particularly. If we know a lot about nutrition, we can feel that kind of desperation that they eat their veggies or, that they eat their meat because of the iron and the zinc. But we know that sort of pressure doesn't help. So that division of responsibility approach is really great. And the other thing is just that ongoing exposure. So many parents just stop putting something on their plate because their kids have said they don't like it. But again, what we know from the research is that repeated exposure, sometimes, dozens and dozens of times, it that helps a child to become more comfortable with the food, and the more
Yeah.
comfortable they are, the more likely they will be to eat it eventually.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm always curious of is, i- if you look culturally, you don't find Italian seaside villages with their kids and the kids going, no, I don't like fish. And no, I don't like, mate, they're given fish. They're given
Yeah,
fish all
because
the
that's all
time.
they've got to eat.
So that's right. That's all they got to eat. So there is this choice, but there's also a normalcy. And I think
Yes.
this is really interesting, is how we've made so many bad things normal. But I wanted to ask you a question about, you've got a lovely, bright, engaging face. Like your eyes light up. Um, is this one of your contrived tricks to engage with children? Because sometimes kids are going through that really shy phase of their life where they don't like strangers. They're clingy to
Mm.
mum, particularly. And at other times, they're a little bit more comfortable with others. How do you practically engage? What hints and tips can you give us so that we can become experts like you are?
Yeah, well, such a good question, and thank you for the for the compliment. I guess I don't know. I think maybe naturally I like I don't even really know what the answer to that is. I'm all and a lot of the work that I do now is more sort of broader education to parents through podcasts and through online like Instagram lives and webinars and things like that. So now at this part of my career, I don't have a huge amount of contact actually with the kids. But yeah, I have always been able to connect fairly well with kids. I'll always make sure that I am, making eye contact with them, talking directly to them, asking them questions, but also saying it's okay, if you don't want to answer. Obviously, this is age dependent. Mum's here to help. But I've always sort of made them part of the whole process when I'm consulting with kids, as opposed to just kind of asking mum for all the answers. And yeah, I just generally being sort of fairly friendly and in clinic, which like I said, I don't really do a lot of clinic work anymore. I've always got something for the kids to, whether it's a box of cars or some Lego or something, which helps because some kids, particularly if kids are on the spectrum, talking directly to them doesn't really work. So, it's good if they can be engaged in something. They tend to be a bit more responsive.
Yeah, sure. So let's move on. Recurrent infections. How do you handle this? This is a quagmire, I know. We're going to get into a lot of food topics, but let's start. Recurrent infections. Where do you start? What foods do you start with? And indeed, can we go into a few treatments that you might find helpful?
Yeah, for sure. So, as soon as you say recurrent infections, the one that comes to my mind that we, experience a lot at Natural Super Kids are the ear infections. Yes. So, of course, you still want to work on those foundations, the nutrient intake, the lifestyle, making sure that their diet is good, but more often than not, it's a bit more complex than that. So, the research shows that recurrent ear infections, I think it's close to 80% of kids with recurrent ear infections have a food allergy or a food intolerance or a food sensitivity of some sort. So there's that that involved as well. And I find more often than not, ear infections are a great example, and other recurrent infections can fall into this category as well. That there's often a bit of an issue with dairy. It's not always dairy, but I would say the vast majority of the time there's an issue with dairy. And so obviously you're looking back at the case history and asking about, what was happening when the child was a baby, and you can pick up on digestive symptoms or things like that can point us down the road of potentially dairy is an issue. So yeah, I'm always looking at intolerances and sensitivities when it comes to recurrent infections. Look, again, I like to obviously, uncovering what that might be is important, and I'm a big fan of the elimination trial diet. So I would start off with advising like at least a 6 week period of cutting either dairy out completely, or if that feels too big for the family, I might just say, well, let's just cut out the A1 casein, because in some cases, in a fair few cases actually, that is enough to reduce that inflammatory load, and they'll be okay with the A2 casein dairy products, so the goat's products, the sheep's products, the 100% Jersey milk, and of course now there's the A2 brand, which makes it much easier for families to access. Not all families are keen to try goat's milk or sheep's milk like us naturopaths might be.
Well, that was really funny actually, because I remember my other son. We put him on goat's milk. He did not do well
Mm.
on cow's milk at all, and the swap to goat's milk was amazing, particularly as an infant. Incredible change in his health. Can I ask
Mm.
the question though about when is a snotty-nosed kid? I'm doing gip gips here for anybody who's listening. The quotation marks. When is a snotty-nosed kid normal, and when is it an indication that there's something going wrong with, say, sinuses or antigen presenting, something like that?
Yeah, well, I would say it's all in the, how long has the snotty kid has the snot been an issue? Mainly, that's what does it sort of come and go with the infections, or is it more sort of long standing? And there are a lot of those kids that seem to be congested all the time. Their noses are always running. A lot of kids will have that issue where it's worse if it's worse in the morning and it gets better as the day goes on. I'm always thinking of dust mite allergy. That's a real classic kind of one, because obviously they thrive in bedding and warm, humid environments and carpets and soft toys. So Yeah, that's a really common sort of issue that I see in kids that tend to always sort of have that congestion and respiratory issue. So if it's coming and going with infections, I would say it's less, less of a long term or problem, or something kind of more serious going on.
Yeah, sure. And of course, you can use encasings when if you're worried about dust mites. So there's bedding encasings, pillow encasings. Uh, I remember the recommendations about get rid of soft toys. They're just a minefield for dust mite, and it's actually the dust mite
Yes.
feces, which is more allergenic. If you wanted to give that a little bit of a push to a little bit of a an emphasis for
Motivation.
parents to
Yeah.
take note. Yeah, motivation. Thank you. And what else was? I mean, oh, sorry. The thing that we did, we ripped up all the carpet in our house. Gone.
Yeah.
We've tiled it.
It can
It's
yeah.
done.
It can make such a
Thankfully,
big difference.
you
Yeah,
go.
and I was just gonna say, even the clothes, so kids these days have so many clothes in their room, and that will put, the mums will put all the winter clothes just loose under the bed, through the summer, and of course that is a big dust collector. Even
Mm,
mattresses, simply just it sounds a bit strange, and it's that extra thing for mums to do, but just vacuuming the mattress every couple of weeks, and yeah, using those dust mite protectors, but getting rid of as much of the soft kind of furniture and toys as possible, at least out of their sleeping room. You can have all those things
yes.
maybe in a different room, but yeah, hot washing and putting them out in the sun. Yeah, these things make a big difference.
Yes, thank you. Damp dusting was the other one. I remember damp dusting
Yes.
rather than dry dusting. Thank you. There was one point that I forgot to make, and it was the biggest remiss, if you like, of my career was that I never bought an otoscope. And yet, being a parent, it was the piece of equipment that I missed the most. If I would encourage any practitioner out there who has got a significant proportion of their patients as children, I would say invest in a good otoscope, and it tells you volumes of information right there and then. Um,
Yeah.
Jess, can we move on? So, recurrent infections. So, when you see things like, the sinuses, the recurrent ears, we've gone through, the bedding and things like that. But what about treatments here? Like, are there any, do you say poster child? Are there any favorite herbs and nutrients here that you find particularly useful?
Yeah, great question. Well, one of the other things that is a big consideration in recurrent infections is vitamin D deficiency. So vitamin D is almost always something that I would prescribe in supplement form for kids with recurrent issues. Look, I try and keep things fairly simple with kids. Focus mainly on nutrition, so things like vitamin D and zinc and vitamin A and vitamin C are always in the mix. And then yeah, depending on sort of what area of the body is affected, elderberry is great for kids, and fairly well tolerated. Of course, the thing with
Mm,
kids is we need to get them to take it. So liquid, I will often go for the formulas, like the powdered kids formulas, tend to kind of work fairly well. Look, I love the medicinal mushrooms, the reishi, the coriolis, the cordyceps. They work really well for boosting immunity generally, but also, they've got those great antiviral properties, and they have that immune regulating effect as well. So, as I said, when there are those food sensitivities or allergies, present, which there often are with these recurrent infections, you've got that immune regulating effect as well as that sort of immune surveillance or immune boosting effect. So yeah, they're often a favorite with these recurrent infections. And like garlic oil, topically into the ear, as long as you can confirm that the eardrum hasn't burst, can work really well as
mm.
well.
Yeah, yeah. I remember at one stage, mullein oil is one of the
Yes.
other things, and it was one of my sort of preferred things. There was only one place you could get it from, and it was so hard to procure. But anyway, the other thing I was going to ask is about. I've just gone off the track. Fever. Forgive me. So a
Yes.
lot of these kids, like the thing that keeps the parents up at night is the child is inconsolable with fever. How do you manage fever?
It's such a good question. I've written some blogs and done some podcasts on fever because I think that there's a lot of awareness that needs to be put out there when it comes to parents
Yeah.
because as soon as our kids are born, we feel like we're not doing a good job at parenting unless we've got a bottle of paracetamol in the in the house. And it's sort of, all the ads and everything are targeted at parents that it's caring for your kids to bring down that fever and make sure they don't have any pain ever. But I think what we really need to get out there in terms of information to parents is that fever has a really positive role in immunity. It ramps up our immune defenses and it slows down the replication of microbes, whatever that microbe might be, whether it's a virus. So if we're jumping straight to fever medication like paracetamol for kids as soon as as their temperature starts to increase, we can actually really prolong the illnesses. And so, obviously, fever is something we do need to be careful of. And I always like to educate parents to take a child led approach. So rather than focusing on the exact numbers of when we need to do something about the fever, it's more, how is that particular child in that particular moment. So if a fever will make a child tired, um, which is great for them as well because then they get the rest that they need, but they should always be fairly responsive. It's when they start to become, unresponsive or confused or they're hard to wake or they're listless, that's when, we definitely need to take some action on bringing that fever down. But generally, I think parents jump to bringing down a fever way too quickly.
I'm so with you there, and guilty as charged earlier. And I remember a really fantastic lesson. This was actually given to me by a doctor, a house call doctor. I remember, um, and he said, "Stop doing the tepid sponging of the kid and things like that." He said, "Get your child into a hot bath, like as hot as they can tolerate it, not boiling. Please be safe, but a warm bath, very warm bath." And here was my son playing happily after feeling miserable. And then he was just splashing away, playing happily. And then the fever resolved. It was really interesting that it was the warmth that helped the fever resolved.
That's really interesting. Well, I've got an 11-year-old daughter, and she's
Mm.
a classic one of, you let the fever go, and she gets quite hot, but I'm always making sure that she's responsive and okay. And then the next day she'll be absolutely fine. Like she just gets over infections so quickly. Obviously, having a naturopath as a mum with all the remedies ready to go is helpful. But it's that leaving that fever and letting her get hot and letting the body do its thing. I think that it has a big part to play in that.
Yeah. I was also going to ask you with regards to medicinal mushrooms. Now, we've got vitamin C, tastes beautiful. We've got orange flavors and things like that. Vitamin D, they're in drops. Big deal. Done. Get them out in the sunlight midday, please. Only for a short amount of time. Safe sun, not long, not sunburn. But with regards to medicinal mushrooms, they taste like mushrooms. So how do you hide them? Do you tend to sort of put them in foods, in soups or mashed potato
Yeah,
maybe?
good question. I think they've come a long way. So I do, there's a particular like product that I use that's in powdered form and it doesn't taste as nowhere near as terrible as the liquid forms of the medicinal mushrooms. And I find that in a little bit of juice. yeah, works really quite well. So, all kids are different. Some kids can be really tricky to get supplements into.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find like try it in water first. Otherwise, a bit of juice. The other little trick that I have with kids supplements is the like mineral water, sparkling mineral water can work really well because it just changes the taste. And the other thing is cold water. Some kids will, flat out refuse supplements in room temperature water, but as soon as it's cold, they prefer it. And then there's all kinds of other tricks that we use, like you can freeze certain supplements into little ice cubes or into ice blocks, or you can make them into, like put a little bit into gelatin gummies, obviously into smoothies, that sort of thing. Yeah, and some kids don't like to drink their supplements, so mixing it in with food can be a good option as well.
Gotcha. Another scourge, mainly for parents, not the child, is the nighttime cough. How do you handle the nighttime cough? Obviously, there's a differentiation here. It could be anything from, asthma to something more severe, or it could be just this post-viral tickle. How do you
Yes.
differentiate? How do you treat?
Oh, it can be really, really tricky, can't it? Especially those coughs that go on for a really long time.
Ah,
And, kids need help during the night. If it's us, then we
mm,
can, cough a little bit and go back to sleep, but kids will call out for us. So I find, in some cases, having like a few pillows under the child, so kind of lifting them up a little bit can really help. Thyme, I love thyme, and I've got a little sort of homemade remedy with fresh thyme, and you just sort of seep that in boiling water and add some manuka honey. I find that really great for
honey,
um,
yes.
symptomatic relief, but obviously also it's addressing the infection and giving the respiratory system some extra support.
I'm we're not going to advertise brands at all, but I do find that with Manuka honey, sometimes the more medicinally strong ones can be extremely expensive. But I did find how do I say this without advertising? A supermarket with a very fast flow through. Um, that their Manuka honey is extremely good value and extremely strong in the UMF
Oh,
rating.
okay.
Just saying. You'll have to sort that one out.
Mm.
So another one, and this is more of, it could be sinister, that is nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. How do you manage it? When do you refer on? How do you manage the safety aspect of this versus the practical treatment aspects that we can employ?
Yeah, good question. I'm pretty cautious with those kind of symptoms, particularly if they're chronic and they've been going for a little while. Look, like I feel like the most important thing with these sorts of symptoms is just to keep the child hydrated. That would be my sort of number one tip for parents. To just don't worry about the lack of appetite so much. And I'm talking, for 3 or 4 days. Anything past that, I would definitely be referring and making sure that they go to their GP. But the most important thing is to keep them hydrated, to let them rest. And yeah, like I said, if vomiting, diarrhea goes on for more than even probably 48 hours, I would recommend that they go to their GP and get checked out. And then post those kinds of symptoms, if it has just been sort of a short term sort of tummy bug, I'd always just make sure that I'm sort of replenishing with good bacteria, so probiotic supplements.
Yeah. Do you ever use colostrum? We're all in the vein of avoiding dairy, but I've got to say, colostrum to me is one of the most underemployed magic supplements that we can ever use.
Yeah, I agree. Colostrum's great. And there is that tricky part where a lot of kids, particularly kids that are, getting help from a naturopath, there could be some, dairy issues.
Mm,
But yeah, colostrum's, amazing. And I agree, it's underutilized.
absolutely. Like I've got to say, I can still remember this poor woman with an inconsolable baby, with severe nappy rash, to the point that the child's anus was bleeding. There was fissures from excoriation. And this poor woman, she felt so guilty because she tried to do the right thing with using cloth nappies and things like that. I know we're talking about infants here, not kids, but I think it just points out how magic colostrum is. And I said, look, you can give this stuff to your child as well as breastfeeding.
Mm.
And make up a little paste and just smooth it onto the excoriated part. And of course, I think it was 3 days, this woman came in and thought I was the best thing since sliced avocado, because we're paleo, not bread. But to me, it just paints out the power of that sort of supplement. And I wish more naturopaths would employ this, but it's not milk, it's colostrum. There's going
That's
to be different
right.
proteins in there. So
There's very
anyway,
little kind of that typical dairy protein. So, yeah, even kids that are sensitive to dairy can often tolerate colostrum. So good for immunity, so good for the gut. And yeah, when there's that, that really awful nappy rash or a current nappy rash, I'm always thinking about the gut. So I'm not surprised that the colostrum helped.
yeah. Jess, where can we find out more? You've spoken about blogs and things like that. Can you direct us to those blogs so that we can find out more?
Yeah, definitely. So you can find everything is all in one easy place. So my website is naturalsuperkids.com. And yeah, I've really sort of, I guess, progressed in my career and my business where I'm, yeah, doing more of the kind of big picture educating. So I now record a podcast every week. So it's aimed at parents to educate them about their kids' health and nutrition. So we cover a variety of topics on the podcast, and you can get to that via the Natural Super Kids website. And then we've got blogs and recordings of Facebook Lives. And the main offering for us at Natural Super Kids is our membership, the Natural Super Kids Club, where we support parents to really boost the health and nutrition of their kids. So we provide healthy recipes and videos and cheat sheets, and we answer members' questions within a private Facebook group. So yeah, it feels really good to be able to offer that, particularly in the world over the last couple of years. It's that affordable support and really just inspiring and educating parents that there are other ways that they can sort of, bring up healthy kids. And a lot of the parents that we attract are looking for complementary ideas to, certain medications and things. Yeah.
And it's obviously a burgeoning population because you're doing so well at it. And I've got to say, this is a real service that you're doing for our population. So I thank you for joining us today on Wellness by Designs, and also just sharing some of your expertise about how we can help change the landscape of these kids' immune systems, because it's so important. And, we've got to get out of this sad diet. We've got to get out of the white beige, as you say, diet. I love it. But thank you so much for sharing these practical tips today on Wellness by Designs. I so appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And of course, thank you for joining us. You can get all the show notes and the other podcasts on the Designs for Health website. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. This is Wellness by Designs.